If some neighbor, coworker, social media friend acts or speaks in a way that is destructive, unjust, immoral, ungodly, what do you do with that person? You should definitely hate the evil thing that they say or do, but how do you treat the person? I'm going to tell you a story about Philip Yancey. I'm sure some of you have read some of his many books. Karen and I are reading through his memoir, Where the Light Fell. It's in our library here. We'd recommend it. He grew up in a very dysfunctional, often angry home with a Christianity that was more put on than flowing from within. By his sophomore year in Bible college, he decided he had no faith, and he took on the identity of the campus apostate. He writes, "The other Bible college students didn't know what to do with someone like me, a sophomore who argues with their beloved professors, reads Esquire in chapel, and disdains prayer meetings." His Christian service assignment from the college was he and 3 other guys would go every Saturday to a nearby university to witness to the students, supposedly. But Philip would spend most of the time watching sports on the TV in one of the university lounges. Every Wednesday, the 4 that were on that team had to gather for a prayer meeting. Philip writes, "We follow a consistent pattern. Joe prays, Craig prays, Chris prays, then all 3 pause politely, waiting for me. I never pray. And after a brief silence, we open our eyes and return to our dorm rooms." One Wednesday evening, I joined the team grudgingly for the requisite meeting. Joe prays, Craig prays, Chris prays, and they wait the usual few seconds. To everyone's surprise, most of all my own, I begin to pray out loud. "God," I say, and the room crackles with tension. A door slams down the hall, interrupting me. I start again. "God, here we are, supposed to be concerned about those 10,000 students in the university who are going to hell. Well, you know that I don't care if they all go to hell, if there is one. I don't care if I go to hell." Yancey writes, "I might as well be invoking witchcraft or offering child sacrifices. Even so, these are my friends and no one moves." My mouth goes dry. I swallow hard and continue. For some reason, I start thinking about the parable of the Good Samaritan, which one of my classes has been studying. We're supposed to feel the same concern for university students as the Samaritan felt for the bloodied Jew lying in the ditch. I pray, I feel no such concern. I feel nothing. If you were one of those 3 friends, how would you respond? Would you have, like them, sat there quiet? What Philip just prayed was horrible. So what would you have done with him? Would you have got up and left? Would you made him leave? Well, in our text, the middle of Matthew 13, Jesus talks about us encountering people who are ungodly, who are speaking or acting against God, contrary to God. And Jesus does this teaching through a parable about weeds among wheat. He teaches how we are to respond and how we are not to respond. Matthew 13 has 7 parables of the kingdom, 7 story metaphors describing this kingdom of heaven that God is going to set up. It's the goal of history. The first one is a parable of the sower that we looked at last week. Jesus sows the seed of his word on different soils. The second parable, today's text, has his enemy also sowing seed in the field. Verse 24, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat. The one sowing the good seed, Jesus identifies in verse 37 as himself. The enemy, Jesus identifies in verse 39 as the devil. And the weeds, he says, are sowed right in the middle of the wheat. And this was a story that Jesus' listeners could identify with. This happened often enough in Jesus' day that there was a law against it, with punishments meted out if you did it. There was this weed-bearded darnel that was indistinguishable from wheat as it was growing. Not until it matures and forms head can you tell the difference. And then even a child can distinguish the two. And this darnel is slightly poisonous, and it has a very bitter and unpleasant taste. So at the harvest, you had to separate it out. Verse 26, there came the time when the weeds as well as the wheat formed heads. So the owner's servants go. Verse 27, sir, where did the weeds come from? And verse 28, an enemy did this, he replied. Jesus and the early church believed that there is a supernatural element to evil. The servants asked, do you want us to go and pull them up? How should we fight this evil? Should we root it out? No, he answered, because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat as well. Let them both grow together till the harvest. At that time, I'll tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds, tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. Jesus went on in this session with people listening to tell a few more parables, and then verse 36, Jesus dismissed the crowd, closed his class for the day, basically, went back to his house, away from the crowd, and was alone with the disciples. And fortunately for us, they asked him to interpret this parable. Verse 37, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. That's how Jesus referred to himself. The field is the world. The good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one. The enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. I want to focus on what is perhaps most surprising in this parable. The parable is talking about the evil that is in this world. Jesus said, the field is the world. Jesus is not talking about evil in the church, but in the world. There are different teachings how we deal with evil in the church. Jesus says something that we don't expect, which I always like, because that means I have something to learn. We assume that Jesus wants us to uproot the evil in the world. So we ask him, don't you want us to go and pull them out? It seems compromising, doesn't it, to coexist with evil rather than root it out? But Jesus answers, verse 29, no, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Evil must be fought, but the how of the fight is crucial. We are not to try to eliminate people, because you may uproot the wheat with them. Good and evil are entwined in life, entwined in lives. Someone may appear to be bad and in fact be just on the verge of breaking good. Violence against evil can destroy a lot of good. So if we want to concentrate our energies on the elimination of evil, if we don't want to tolerate any weeds, we might end up with not very much wheat either. So Jesus says, at the harvest time, pull out the weeds first, tie them up in bundles for burning. Jesus, in the end, will not be indifferent to evil. The burning shows that. But in this life, we relate to anyone who is evil and ungodly with mercy. The book of Jude vividly describes evil persons. And then in verse 22, it starts talking about showing mercy to them as persons. But verse 23 says, this mercy is to be mixed with fear, hating even the clothing stained by corrupted flesh. Mercy to the persons, but not to the evil itself. We are not to judge that this person is not or never will become good. How many of you know persons who are walking with God now who at one point you thought they would be the last person in the world who would walk with God? I'll finish the story of Philip Yancey that evening. If you're reading the book like Karen and I are, you know that God was doing many things in his life to soften him at this point. So something happens in the middle of that prayer. So continuing on his description, then it happens in the middle of my prayer as I am admitting my lack of the same concern for university students that the Samaritan felt for the bloody Jew lying in the ditch. The parable comes to me in a new light. I have been visualizing the scene as I pray. A swarthy Middle Eastern man dressed in robes and a turban bending over a dirty, blood-stained form in the ditch. Without warning, those two figures now morph on the internal screen of my mind. The Samaritan takes on the face of Jesus, and the Jew, pitiable victim of a highway robbery, also takes on another face, one I realize with a start as my own. In slow motion, I watch Jesus reach down with a moistened rag to clean my wounds and staunch the flow of blood. As he bends toward myself, I see myself, the wounded victim of a crime, open my eyes and spit on him full in the face. Just that. The image unnerves me. I am rendered speechless. Abruptly, I stop praying, I rise, and I leave the room. He says all that evening he was brooding over what took place. And here's what he wrote and read in one of his classes just a few days later. I started to tell God how much I hated people, and I really didn't care if the whole blasted university went to hell. And then something happened. I was asking God to somehow, even though I didn't want him to, give me the love of the Good Samaritan who loved irrationally with no reason, who loved a repulsive, filthy tramp. And then it hit me. I was the tramp, and God was trying to help me. And every time he leaned over, I spit in his face. Philip writes, I date my conversion from that prayer. Never try to eradicate an evil person, an ungodly person. I'm so glad Philip's 3 friends had patience with him. Imagine if when he started praying the way that he did, they got up in disgust. Or, made him stop. Never see the evil person as your enemy. Ephesians 6 says our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against these people. It's against the principalities, the spiritual rulers of darkness, the powers of evil in the heavens. It's like all the bad mindsets that people take on have a spiritual component to them, and that's what we are fighting. In the end, if the ungodly person does not repent, does not distance themselves from their sin, there will be justice. Verse 41, at the end of the age, the Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom anything that causes sin and all who do evil. Everyone who does evil themselves and causes people to stumble, others to stumble and to not trust and obey God, but do evil, will be eradicated in the end. Those who don't say to God, your will be done, will hear God say to them, your will be done. You chose not to be in my kingdom, so you are not in my kingdom of heaven. But in this life, in this age of grace, they are people to be loved. God loves them. God died for them. God, by his Spirit, is working in their hearts. Who knows how close they are to turning? Who knows, they may yet join us as some of that righteous group who will shine like sun in the kingdom of our Father.